The first film to ever gross over $1 billion worldwide at the box office in 1997, Titanic went on to conquer the Academy Awards the next year by being the most nominated film with the most wins, including the biggest prize, tying with 2 other films for the record. Directed by one of cinema's most visionary and revolutionary directors, James Cameron, the story of the Titanic revolves around 2 young people who met and fell in love on the ship that met its doom on its maiden voyage in April of 1912. His interest on the Titanic began when the shipwreck of the giant ship was discovered 2.5 miles down, resting on the North Atlantic seabed. Having visited the site several times himself, it became a passion project for Cameron that will last for several years, as he wants to bring the most famous ship in history onto the big screen in all of her glory and tragedy. When the film was released in 1997, it became a cultural phenomenon, and the 2 young leading stars, Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, became A-list actors that he still retain to this day. However, as the years go by, interest in the film cooled off a lot, and a bit of a backlash over its unprecedented success caused its popularity to sink to a point where people are not talking about it anymore. The film starts off with an expedition to the wreck site. Brock Lovett, played by Bill Paxton, is searching for the heart of the ocean, a jewel that went missing after the Titanic sinking. Having no regards for the historical or human story that surrounds the ship, he finds his first clue of the jewel's existence in a drawing recovered from the wreck. This brought the attention of an old lady named Rose, played by Hollywood veteran Gloria Stewart, and there she tells her story of her time on the Titanic. The young Rose, played by Winslet, is a socialite who is promised to be wed to Cal, played by Billy Zane, in order to save herself and her mother from poverty, but she hates the idea because she is forced into the arrangement without her consent, feeling trapped with no future for her to control. In her moment of weakness, she was ready to cast herself in the ship of dreams when she is rescued by Jack Dawson, played by DiCaprio. From there, a whirlwind romance began that would take them all over the ship all the way up to its final moments. Both DiCaprio and Winslet have already started their career in movie making, both making their screen debut when they were teenagers. When looking at the films they worked on prior to Titanic, some of them are pretty mature in their themes, and people recognize the talents and skills that the 2 have as actors. In this film, they do play their parts as believable lovers. Not only do they feel like real human beings, but they also have a strong chemistry going on between them. For something that lasts for a relatively short time, the romance between the 2 actually does feel organic. Rose, feeling trapped in her social upbringing, loves Jack's independence and wants to experience what was denied to her. Jack himself fell in love with her strength and passion that he got to see with their time together. This story is akin to Romeo and Juliet, as it looks like young love at its most raw form that is cut short at its height. That is probably why so many people seem to cool off from this film, because there isn't really anything deep about the romance, because it doesn't explore all the trappings and nuances of it, or that it distracted from the whole seeking event when it does reach that point in the film. For all of the good things that I've said about the 2 characters and their relationship, I must admit that they are my least favorite aspect of the film, because in the end, I found myself not caring all that much about it. While it doesn't feel like it was tacked on, as it does feel that Cameron did put some thought into the story, I actually would have preferred if there were more of an ensemble casting, where we get equal amounts of screen time and character development across many different people, like 3 or 4 major characters along with Jack and Rose. The 2 leads felt like they didn't have enough interesting qualities for me to want to spend 3 hours with, while there are plenty of supporting characters to watch, both fictional and historical, that have enough for the film to explore a little more deeply. The more interesting aspect of the film is that we get to see what it's like to be on the Titanic. Because the 2 leads are from completely different social classes, we can actually see how those classes are separated from each other and their differences in their lifestyles. The rich and famous, of course, live lavishly in beautiful settings that reflect their sensibilities, while the poor that make up the majority of the passengers live in more confined spaces and bland settings. I don't know if it's just me or not, but I felt there was a sense of what's the right word? A denouncement against the high class. Yes, people were treated differently depending on what social ladder you were on, and it certainly existed back then. But I can't help but feel that it wants to blatantly shake its finger at some of the high class people for their ignorance. The most notable is Rose's fiancé, Cal. You can pretty much sum up his character with a few scenes.
Well, I may have to start minding what she reads from now on, won't I, Mrs. Brown?
You will honor me the way a wife is required to honor a husband.
Half the people on this ship are going to die.
Not the better half.
I know he's supposed to be portrayed as a dick, and I have no problem with that. But when you are one step away from slapping a sticker on his forehead that says villain in a film that doesn't need one in the first place, without sharing any positive qualities or understand a little from his perspective, then it starts to get rather annoying. With all of that aside, even though this film launched DiCaprio's and Winslet's Hollywood careers to the stratosphere, Titanic herself is the biggest star of this film, and I don't mean that literally. Cameron felt a sense of duty to recreate the ship as she was when she sailed on her first and final voyage in 1912 to the tiniest of details. Using a mixture of practical and CGI effects along with historically accurate and inspired set decorations, costumes, and makeup, they brought her back to life and sunk her again in the minutest of details and used as much as they can to cram into the film. What resulted is a remarkable cinematic moment. I actually had an interest in Titanic as a kid, and while I never got the chance to see the film in theaters, I do remember being rather spellbound by the film when I got the chance to see it, and even saw it as a history lesson on the sinking of the ship. Now nearing this 20th anniversary of the film's release, the effects still look as amazing and impressive. It really does feel like I'm seeing the ship in her full glory and get to see so much more to show just how amazing the ship really was. From the elaborate designs of the interior to the huge engines that shows the incredible power that it took to make her move. And the Oscar-winning music by James Horner just gives this part of the film where Titanic finally runs at full power a sense of grace and strength that the score convey. However, as we all know, it will not end well for all on board. The moment that the ship struck the iceberg happens around an hour and a half into the film, and in a 3-hour movie, that's a whole other movie in and of itself with the sinking and its aftermath. And this is where the true power of the film comes from. The sinking itself starts off slowly, so the majority of the passengers figures that there was nothing wrong. But as time went on and people start to realize the horrible truth, emotions run high. There were moments of families separated from each other, people panicking, and some that just accept their fate because, as what made the tragedy a legacy, there weren't enough lifeboats for everybody in the first place. Again, the combined use of practical effects and CGI brought the whole event up close and personal, as close to how the real Titanic sank that night and experienced the terror and horror through so many eyes. It is an amazing combination of cinematic artistry and technology that just makes the whole thing worth the wait and is something to behold. And going back to James Horner's score, the music just takes the impact to a whole new level, giving it a sorrowfulness tone, also having a rather exhilarating sound that gives the ship her final moments before disappearing into the Atlantic Ocean. I can somewhat understand why some people were not impressed by this film and angry by its huge success because the story, especially the ending, didn't have that emotional punch that can compare to the whole tragedy that I just witnessed. While the theme of the whole film is an honorable one, it did kinda offsets itself when the main focus is on 2 characters, hence why I prefer a bigger cast with more characters that can match it. Even so, these flaws are so minor that I could forgive them because I was never bored. I never felt there was a scene wasted or misused, and again, I was interested in the main characters enough for me to make it through. Yeah, the story doesn't match the extraordinary and majestic production, but as long as it's not bad storytelling, it's still watchable. As for all of those Oscars it won, it definitely deserves some of them, even for Best Director. But for Best Picture, I would have picked other films simply because I enjoyed them more. But no matter what, it should not cloud my judgment, and I say that it is a film that was made with respect and love, and it would be something that I could recommend to someone to check it out.